Hi, and welcome to Something to Talk About. I'm Linda McNamee, and for the next hour, since we're getting ready to go back to school, we are going to investigate IEPs. What is an IEP, you ask? You will find out momentarily. But before I begin, actually, as I always begin, if you have a question for our wonderful guests, whom you will meet momentarily, you can give us a call this evening. We are live, 781-270-9199. I think that's the number. Yes, because I never call because I'm here. Or if you have a suggestion for a future topic, you can always email me at talk@bcattv.org. I would like to thank my wonderful crew for this evening who faithfully and willingly give up their Wednesday evenings. We have Chris Flaherty, who is a staff member here, making sure us volunteers behave ourselves. Jolie Atwood, Stephanie Floridas, Liz Gillespie, and Jake Doobie. Thank you, everyone, for coming and hanging out at BCAT. And last but definitely not least, I want to thank my husband, Paul, for staying home for Daddy Date Night. Hopefully you're having fun playing with the new kittens and the kids. So, I think all of our logistics are aside, all of our housekeeping's taken care of. Now I would like to introduce our wonderful guests for this evening. We have Grace Dragon and her mom, Melissa, and we are going to talk about education. Right? Sound good?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Why not? Well, thank you for coming. Now, have you started school yet, Grace?
Well, no.
No. When do you start, next week?
After Labor Day.
After
that's all
Labor
I
Day.
know.
That's next week.
Yeah, let's say that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to ask your mom a little bit first, and then we'll start talking to you a little bit more. Where you grew up, how you got interested in law, and what made you decide to become an advocate for IEPs and for education?
Well, I grew up in New York, outside of Manhattan, and I wanted to be a musical theater actress. But I sing like Ethel Merman and have
well,
two
look
left
at what it
feet.
did for her, you know.
So it didn't work so well for me, but I enjoyed public speaking, and theater led to law. And when I thought about what kind of law I wanted to do, I really thought I wanted to help children. But when I was in my early 20s, I thought, well, kids don't have any money, so how am I going to work with children or advocate for children? They can't
Got
pay
student
me.
loans here, you know.
Right. So then here I was all these years later doing family law, and I had children of my own. And my cases led me to understand that there were children who had special education needs, mainly autism or dyslexia, that really required a different school setting. And in my desire to help children, it led me into this work where I saw an opportunity to make a big difference in a child's life by putting them in the right school setting. And that required a level of advocacy on the child's part, and working with the parents and working with the school district to get them into the right school.
Because I remember you did come on, oh geez, when was it?
Several years ago.
2014 or
Yes.
something, and we did talk about IEPs, or individualized educational plans.
Yes.
Is it individual plans or individualized?
Individualized. So the idea
Okay.
is that we start with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
Okay.
And it's a federal law that says that children who have alternative learning styles, so dyslexia, autism, or all sorts of other...
Or sometimes just developmental delays.
Exactly.
As well.
Or there are children who in certain learning styles, they have so much anxiety that it creates a wall and they can't access the curriculum. And so when you study the different learning styles and you study the different learning environments, you really learn one size doesn't fit all. There's a lot of children who are neurotypical learners.
Okay.
They can be in the public school system and they can thrive. There's also a lot of children, so approximately 8 to 10% of the population has dyslexia. And then there's many others who have autism, and then sometimes there are children who have autism and dyslexia. Those children can learn as well. So we have John Lennon, we have Pablo Picasso, we have Steve Jobs, we have Bill Gates. They all would either be classified as dyslexic or some level of autism.
Wow.
And look what they have done in terms of art and in terms of moving our society forward and in terms of ideas, inventions. But if you have them in the wrong school setting, there's a whole myriad of talents that they have they're never unleashed.
Okay.
And when you get a child in the right school setting that understands how to teach to their different learning style,
Okay.
such as Grace's at Landmark, they understand how to teach to dyslexic individuals.
Okay.
You can see that they blossom, and their different ways of processing information can be such a gift to the rest of us because they
Cool.
can see things differently.
Okay. Now, backing up a little bit.
Yes.
I remember our last conversation way back when. You just mentioned the word thrive.
Yes.
Now, how do you define thriving via surviving, thriving, succeeding? It seems kind of like a spectrum
You mean in the public school or
of
private
public school or just in a child's educational setting.
So the individuals.
How do you measure thriving? How do you measure success?
Well, I think what you're talking about is progress,
Yeah,
which is
okay.
the term that the federal law states, is that
Okay.
you know a child is doing well in their individualized education plan if we see progress.
Okay.
And progress is a mathematical, statistical equation. So if you have 2 standard deviations up the scale,
Okay.
that is what's considered measurement of progress.
Okay.
If you have 2 standard deviations down the scale, that is considered regression. If an
Okay.
autistic child or dyslexic child is in a public school placement and they are regressing,
Okay.
that's evidence, proof positive they are not making progress.
Okay.
And our federal and state laws say that those children need an IEP in the public school.
Okay.
And if they continue to regress or flatline in
Okay.
terms of progress, it's time to look at a specialized school that
Okay.
can teach to their way of processing information.
Okay. So let's figure out how it's established that someone is in need of an IEP.
So there's early intervention that
Okay.
happens in schools. The federal law
Early intervention starts at like birth to 3 years, isn't it?
birth to 3 years, but
Okay.
also a parent could say, we think our child is an alternative learner, or that they have low frustration tolerance. Can you screen them for autism? Or
okay.
in Grace's case, very early on, I was doing work with other parents advocating for their dyslexic children.
Okay.
And I was looking at Grace's handwriting in pre-K and in kindergarten, and I was seeing markers of that in her
Okay.
handwriting that I was seeing in children that I knew to be dyslexic.
Okay. Now, did the
And-
school figure anything
No,
out?
she was in a Montessori school at the time.
Okay.
And there was no public effort to intervene, even though the federal statute says that our states have a child find requirement.
Okay.
Almost like Cinderella and the slipper.
Okay.
The concept is they're supposed to go out into the land and find all the children who have these issues.
Okay.
What actually happens due to lack of funding is that you could be a parent coming to the school saying, I know my child has dyslexia, here it is. And they'll say, I don't know if they really do. And that's why, because when you establish a child
Okay.
is eligible for an IEP,
Okay.
that triggers a lot of legal requirements on the school that they have to deliver on. And if they
Okay.
fail to make progress with that child in that placement, they're now
okay.
looking at a very expensive other
Got it.
placement. So there
So I'm not
is-
listening. I'm not
Right.
listening. Okay.
Right, I don't see what you're talking about. This child's fine, right? Until you show it to them in a way that's so aggressive, they have to concede, and then they find the child eligible. But the battle is still going on because they can tell you your child's making progress, and you can say, here, I have evidence they're regressing. And so that's a whole different
Okay.
battle
And there's also,
entirely.
little progress versus normal progress.
That's right. And so it's a whole measurement issue. You can imagine there's a lot of litigation
It's a
around that.
relative, yeah.
Yes,
Progress is a relative term.
right.
So, Grace, I have a question for you.
Yes.
When did you notice that you were learning differently than like some of the other kids? Did you know, or did your mom have to tell you, or how did you feel?
Do you
did I
remember in
feel?
French class in Montessori?
You
Well-
took French class? Oh,
She
gee.
did.
I
Okay.
was terrible at French class.
Yeah, me too.
Really.
You're really.
And,
Like I
when-
didn't understand anything. Anything in French class.
and you would come home, and what would you tell Daddy and I how you felt?
What did I say?
Do you remember how you said?
No, I don't.
No?
No.
But you were struggling with learning French, right? And other things.
Yep,
And so what was difficult was that she was 5 or 6 at the time.
I was.
And so unfortunately at the time they were saying that you can't determine dyslexia until they're 7. So we're in a situation where she's in kindergarten and
she's a
first grade and we
smart
still can't
kid
get a read
and-
on it,
Wow.
right?
Uh-huh.
And so then remember when you went into public school, how did you feel there? What happened the first day? Do you remember?
Now, were you in kindergarten or first grade at this point?
She was in 2nd grade when she went to public school.
Oh, okay.
And they started her with a word scramble on the first
Oh,
day
I
of
hate
school.
those.
But the thing is, if you understand dyslexia, she had an IEP, and they knew she had severe dyslexia.
Oh, they already knew this, and they still
they
gave it to
had a
her?
word scramble, and they had no assistants around her. And then everyone in the room had a name tag,
Okay.
and she couldn't read. So I was furious. I would remember leaving there that day saying, my daughter has an IEP. She has severe dyslexia.
Why wasn't somebody...
She's here to get help for her severe dyslexia. Why is she starting the first day of school with absolutely no help? And why on earth would you give a dyslexic student a word scramble when dyslexic individuals cannot make any kind of sense of nonsense words? That's like asking someone with no arms to do push-ups. You wouldn't do that. And so it was horrifying to see that the implementation of the assistance and the accommodations that these individuals need in a public school were not being followed through with.
Okay.
And so that's one of the biggest problems, is that there's the federal law that says that these are the things we're going to do for dyslexic individuals, alternative learners, autistic students.
Okay.
I am amazed when I hear, so with autism, it's a different skill set, but with autism, very often they're very bright, but they have trouble with social and emotional relationships.
Okay. Like the eye contact. And,
Absolutely. And I've heard parents tell me that the school districts have told them their child cannot qualify for an IEP because their child's grades are so great. But meanwhile, that child has no friends because they're autistic. So there's a social emotional component to learning. It isn't just the academic.
Okay. Right.
And so because there's a lack of funding, that's what is the
Okay.
tail wagging the dog. So the states, I think the public schools do want to help these kids, but they don't have the funding
But their
to be
hands are
able to do
their
it.
hands are tied. So in Grace's case, she was in 2nd grade, not getting the requirements from her IEP met. What was the next step that you did? I mean, how did you find this alternate school? How did you convince everybody that it really was dyslexia that she was working with? Tell me more.
So we had a psycholinguistic expert
Okay.
be able to give Grace all sorts of testing.
And this was through the school?
No,
Or this
we
was...
privately hired them to do
okay.
this. And then we also had all sorts of testing that was done through the school. So if you're a parent who's concerned about your child and you're noticing your child's bright, but for some reason it's not clicking, certain things aren't clicking, or you might have the teacher say to you, you know, Junior's really bright, and they really seem that they understand the concepts, but then when I'm testing Junior, something's not lining up. That's really where a parent should say, okay, it's time for me to ask the school system to do testing, to screen, to see if there's any kind of alternative learning style. That's where a parent should start first.
Okay.
But understand that the public schools are going to test just the surface. So there's 14 types of tests you can do, and the public schools only do about 2 of them.
Okay.
So that's really where, as a parent, it is worthwhile to educate yourself on the depths of which you can go to really understand how your child learns, how they process.
Okay.
Very often, I've received a case where the parents say, we don't know what's going on with our child.
Okay.
They've been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Okay.
They're taking Ritalin. Okay.
Okay.
But it's not
Now, do
working.
you think like ADHD is like one of those catch things where they don't
Yes,
know and
absolutely.
they just okay?
Absolutely.
This
so
is probably where you're going. With
quite
this whole
yeah,
thing.
exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly where I was going was. So it's a catch-all. So there's a
Okay.
lot of parents who believe that their child has ADHD, puts their child on Ritalin. Their child is now extremely awake and very aware of their disability. but the Ritalin's not helping them at all because they are either autistic or dyslexic, and there was a very cursory level of investigation, and so someone just concluded it was ADHD. But why is there attention deficit? Why is there hyperactivity? Maybe because you can't read what you're being asked to read, and so you're acting frustrated, and you seem like your attention, you have a deficit. You don't have a deficit, you're having trouble accessing the curriculum.
Okay.
So it comes off as behavioral, as an attention deficit behavioral issue, when actually it's a processing issue, right? So that's kind of why parents really need to not just start and stop with what the public school will do, because they're going to do the bare minimum. Parents really would be well advised to do much deeper psycholinguistic evaluations.
So how would parents know where to go to get this additional training?
They would go to their pediatrician, and they would say, we believe our child has an alternate way of processing information that can affect their ability to learn.
Because wouldn't they also have to go to their pediatrician for ADHD?
Absolutely. So their pediatrician's going to say, go to a neuro psychiatrist, go to a psycholinguistic expert. They're going to know where to refer them to.
Okay.
Then these experts are doctors, but they're doctors in the way that we process and learn. And they're specialized, and they're going to know how to drill down what exactly is going on with your child. Is it ADHD or is it dyslexia? Is it dyslexia plus some autistic traits? Is it autism?
Or could it just be like something like anxiety or?
Exactly. So, absolutely. And then understand too, if your child is so anxious and they're having such difficulty, let's say, I know in North Andover that the high school is the population between 3 classes, 9, 10, and 11, or I'm sorry, 10, 11, and 12, 500 each. So you've got a student body in the high school of 1,500 kids.
That's
if
huge.
You're a child who has any issues with crowds or what have you, you're not going to do well in a student body like that.
Yeah.
You're going to need a much smaller student body. Doesn't mean you can't learn, doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means that you're in the wrong environment for your learning style. So there is case law that supports situations where a child is having school refusal and having so much anxiety because of the way that the public school is so large. And when the child is put into a smaller class environment, they thrive. So sometimes it doesn't even need to be that they're out of the public school and into a separate school like Landmark for dyslexic individuals, like Grace is. It could be a situation where simply they just need to be in a smaller class within a public school. And that's also what IEPs can do. They start with how can we accommodate this different learning style within the public school umbrella. And then if you can show that the data proves regression or flatlining with no progress, that's what triggers looking into other schools, like a Landmark school.
But is it the parent or the pediatrician or the school or someone else?
The parents.
That says, okay, this public school thing isn't working. We need to find an alternative.
The parents. The parents. And what's difficult too, which I run into, is we all believe that teachers love our children because they do, and that teachers got into education because they love working with children and educating them because they do. But guess what? When you have to pay for $1 million worth of education and you've got $10, what are you going to do? You're going to start gaslighting, right? Because you can pay for one child and you've got 10 million kids who need it. So what are you going to do? And so either teachers are in a position where to keep their jobs, they have to be silent at these IEP meetings, or they wind up getting so sickened because they say, I got into this work to help children, and now I'm in a position where I have to sit in an IEP meeting where I watch parents being told their child is making progress, and I know full well their child needs to be somewhere else, and I can't say anything. Because they're not the decision makers. The special education department makes that call. The superintendent
so it's more like
makes that call.
Okay.
But the teachers are left holding the bag.
Yeah.
The teachers are left having to
accommodate,
toe the line, and say someone's making progress when they're not. And it's a really difficult thing that I see happening to teachers and school psychologists. I've met both who say they're not in education anymore because of this crisis of funding. and it starts at our federal government, and then it trickles down to the states.
Okay.
So Grace and I found ourselves at the State House recently
Ooh,
because
yeah, I want to find out about that.
the Massachusetts Senate Education Committee
Okay.
was having hearings on special education issues. One of them was a bill that was purporting to get funding to do a statewide investigation
Okay.
into IEP contracts and are they being implemented?
Okay, the contract.
Yes.
Is it the family versus the school? Are those
So-
the two bodies and the two partners in the contract?
So once you go to the school and you say,
Okay.
I believe my child needs special education,
Okay.
then they do their cursory, very surface level
Yeah.
testing. Then from there, they say your child is eligible.
Okay.
Then from there, you see how it goes. And then from there, no one's going to ring the bell except you. You
Okay.
and your child
Now,
is
how
going to know it's not
long
working.
is this process before it's reevaluated? Is it every 6 months? Is it every year? Is
So
it
it's generally every year. It's
Okay.
year to year as an evaluation. In Grace's case, when she was in public school, she was there, I think, a day. And I asked for an emergency IEP meeting.
a day?
Because I learned that my child, who was there for a reason to have dyslexia remediation, was getting zero remediation and was actually being placed in a situation that was going to highlight her disability in a very uncomfortable and painful
Okay.
way. And we knew it wasn't working for Grace
Okay.
because Grace would come back and say things to us like, why do I need to be pulled out of my class? It
Okay.
makes me feel stupid. I don't feel that I'm learning. I don't know. They tell me I'm reading, but I don't feel like I know how to read. Right, Grace? I mean, how did you feel when they would have to pull you out of your class?
Well, I really didn't like it
Why?
because I felt really different from all the other kids, and I felt really dumb because I thought that those kids in my class were smarter than me. They were very smarter than me. So they were at a bigger learning level than I was.
Okay. Did they treat you any differently, or did
No.
you? Okay.
They didn't really, but one thing that was difficult is, Richard Branson is a very famous dyslexic individual.
Okay.
And as we know, he's been a very successful, creative individual. And one of the things I love that he said is, why on earth is the word for our condition when we are language challenged such a difficult word, right? So dyslexia is probably the most
it's like one of those
complicated
SAT
word.
words that-
It is.
yeah.
It's a 25-cent word, even for people who don't have dyslexia. We're like, what is that word? And so he said, why do we have the most difficult word for our condition? Well, Grace was in the 2nd grade. So here she was, and here's the idea from the special educators and the powers that be.
Okay.
We want the least restrictive learning environment. So what does that mean? That means Grace has dyslexia, but we're not going to put her in a substantially separate school.
Okay.
We're going to have her mainstreamed. Maybe that works. I don't really see how it works with dyslexic individuals because she was the only student in her class of 25 students.
That's a big class.
Right. She would try to explain to them what was going on for her, and she'd say, I have dyslexia, because she has dyslexia, and it was hard for her to say as a 7-year-old child.
Yeah.
Then they would not even understand, because they were 7, what the heck she was talking about. So then they were just kind of like, what's a little weird with you, right? And then that would make her feel like
Different.
there was something wrong with her, when
Yeah.
really there's just a different way of learning.
Right.
And so that's where I really take issue with this concept that the least restrictive learning environment is best for children. I disagree. I don't think that dyslexic individuals learn better where they are the only dyslexic individual in a class of 25 kids.
Right.
What that led to was Grace being pulled out of a class that she wants to feel part of. She feels ostracized. Then she's plopped back in and she's missed what's going on, right? So she's pushed and pulled out. That's the system for giving services for a dyslexic student in the public school.
Okay.
Whereas when we got her to Landmark School, that is a school where all the children there look completely normal and are completely normal kids. And they just happen to have dyslexia. And so what it does is, it does this miraculous thing where it takes this ostracism this feeling of what's different and wrong.
Right.
It normalizes.
Yeah.
And then she sees, wow, I just am a kid, just like this other kid. We
Okay.
just happen to have dyslexia, and we understand each other. She doesn't have to explain it.
Okay.
It was said by one of the
Don't
parents.
have to pronounce it.
Right.
Yes.
Like it was said by one of the parents, do you ever talk about how you all have dyslexia at Landmark? And one of the students said, we would never talk about it because we all know we have it and we all understand it. Why would we ever talk about
It's
it?
a non-issue.
Yet in the public school, she had to constantly explain why she had to be pushed in and pulled out, what her condition was, which kept rubbing salt in the wound of what she's trying to overcome. So that's really what we're trying to help educators and legislators understand,
Okay.
that places like Landmark do such amazing work.
Okay.
And this concept of the least restrictive environment with certain types of learning styles, actually, when you get dyslexic individuals together, the strength and confidence that they give each other helps them learn that much faster
Cool.
than if they felt like they were the odd one out.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
So Landmark is a school specifically designed to help students who have dyslexia.
Dyslexia or other types of language-based learning disabilities.
Okay. Now, is it elementary up to grade 5?
So it starts in second grade,
Second grade.
and then you can graduate high school from Landmark.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's amazing when you really learn the levels of the depth to which they understand the way the brain works. Their Landmark is in touch with MGH and with Harvard Medical, and they're constantly studying the neuroscience to the dyslexic brain. If you were to see a CAT scan of a neurotypical brain, and then a dyslexic individual's brain and an autistic individual's brain, you will see different areas of the lobes are lit up. There is no denying the neuroscience. And so what they're doing is they're integrating the neuroscience with their teaching methods. So for Grace, one of the ways that she learns math is they all bring out their Play-Doh. So when it's time to learn math, they all bring out their Play-Doh.
Oh, that is so cool.
And then they make
What color is your Play-Doh?
So the Play-Doh was all different colors. You could pick the Play-Doh. So if you wanted the Play-Doh to be blue, teal, orange.
Can you mix the Play-Doh up? Or are you not allowed to do
No,
that?
you can't do that.
Yeah,
so
I don't let my kids mix up the Play-Doh because that's just wrong.
My teacher, Miss Arneo,
Uh-huh.
she had this little tray of Play-Doh.
Okay.
And there was Play-Doh
Okay.
in there, of course. And there was all different colors.
Okay.
So there was blue, orange. Do people make red Play-Doh? I don't know.
Yeah,
But
it's kind of red.
And then you would make them
Kind
into
of red.
balls.
And then how did you
and then
how did you study math with Play-Doh?
Icons are a big thing in Landmark.
Okay.
So dyslexic individuals, they don't really understand because it moves around.
The orthographic configurations that we refer to as letters, they're actually just shapes. And for the dyslexic individual like Grace, what she's saying is that when she sees, let's say the letter the letter T or S or whatever, we see it as static. Her eyes see it moving. I know. Makes it
That's
very
kinda scary.
difficult to try to read or learn.
Now, how did you explain this to someone? Because you don't know what we see because you see things differently.
Okay.
All right, well, let's get back to the Play-Doh. So how do you figure out math with Play-Doh?
So then you made the little balls. And then when
So-
you were doing math, addition or subtraction, what would you do with the balls?
So what I did with the balls was we had to make icons. So say I had to make the number 5.
Okay.
You would put a dot at 2 dots at the top, 1
Okay.
dot in the middle, and 2 dots at the bottom.
Oh, kind of like a dice.
Yeah.
Yeah, what
Okay.
it looks like on the dice.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what we would have to make with the balls. And then if we were doing subtraction, then we would squish them or take them away. My favorite part
Was
was
squishing
to
them?
squish it.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
And so
I
what
think I'd
they're
go for
doing
squishing
is
too.
they're tying the physical
Okay.
into the learning. So by pushing the balls down, you're locking in the subtraction concept, right?
Okay.
Or another way that they would learn math is that they would all get up and stand up, and then they would have this conversation. And so Grace would say, okay, Jack, if I have 8 apples and I give 3 to Izzy, how many do I have? And then she would move over to this section, and then he would move and say
So
things.
like physical.
So they're tying the physicality, they're using color.
Okay.
And then another thing that they do at Landmark is they really encourage all the students to get very comfortable at standing on a stage and speaking into a microphone.
Oh, okay.
And really overcoming fear of speaking and public speaking and all
Man,
of
I could use that.
Big time. So, well, I'm not saying you need it, but we
Well,
all
no,
do it.
I
All
was
students.
Senior in college, and I'm like, I don't want to raise my hand.
Right.
in class.
So they really use so many different learning styles, and then just the physicality of it. And then, what's the other piece too that they have you memorize, right? So they really, so you know how you had to memorize the poem and then perform it? So they have the kids really work on memorization. So Tom Cruise is a famous dyslexic.
Okay.
And you think, well, how can he be an actor? He learned how to memorize really well. And so what they do at Landmark, by way of helping the kids, they teach them to memorize a poem. And then they perform the poem on the stage. And what they're doing is they're teaching the kids to strengthen that muscle of memorization.
Okay.
And then through memorizing sight words, we
Okay.
sound them out phonetically. Grace sees the word the. She doesn't sound it out. She just knows visually that word is
okay.
the.
Okay.
So, when I look at words, surprisingly, people would normally not understand this.
Okay.
So, it moves around. Surprise.
That's kind of scary.
It can be kind of scary, but the thing is,
But it's always been that way, so it's
I've
normal to
always
you.
seen the world moving
Oh,
all the
okay.
time. So, when I look
You're
at
a woman on a mission.
sentences, so if I look at a poem,
Okay.
or like if you say a whole essay of
Okay.
words, it would move around and drive me crazy.
Yes, it would.
But so the thing was,
Watch your microphone.
my teacher, Miss Arnio, we had to do a poem.
Okay. Did you get to pick the
And-
poem? Or did she
yes.
tell you which one you had to?
Well, there was a whole list of them, and
Okay.
so kickball. Everybody really played kickball in the courtyard. So
Okay. Kickball's cool.
yeah, so we picked kickball.
Mm-hmm.
So we picked a story, well, a poem for that,
Okay.
and
And you all memorized it.
yes, but the good thing was about that poem.
Okay.
Yes.
That poem had colors because
Okay.
I was red because that was my class color, and
Okay.
everybody else's were colors, their class color.
Oh, okay.
So
So y'all had different
that
colors.
actually helped me
Okay.
space out the words. So like, remember, so the essay paper,
Mm-hmm.
if they put coloring in it, it makes my eyes look like all the other words are gone, and only that color that is highlighting the sentence.
Oh, okay.
It's easier for me to see.
Okay.
So actually, for dyslexic individuals, and this is something where for parents who have children who are dyslexic and they're still in the public school system and their child's struggling with learning, you can Google colored lenses for dyslexic individuals, and you will see there's a whole color scheme for dyslexic individuals.
Okay.
And a lot of times yellow is the key color, and if they use a yellow tinted lens, it
Oh.
can stop the moving that Grace is talking about visually.
Oh.
So a lot of times
She gets to wear
people-
sunglasses.
Yes. Cool ones. But a lot of times people think that dyslexia is related to the rods and the cones in the eyes. It's
Okay.
not. If you actually study the way that the brain processes
Okay.
stimulation, you'll learn that we see it and then our minds flip the image
Okay.
So what's happening is her projector between her two lobes in her brain are processing, and then when it's coming back out again, it's moving for whatever reason, because that's the way her brain is processing stimulation. So she has talked about it before. She said that she wishes she did not have dyslexia.
It's true.
I explained to her that having dyslexia, even though right now she doesn't feel that way, it actually is a gift, because Picasso was a dyslexic individual. John Lennon was a dyslexic individual. And these are amazing artists who have been able to contribute by helping people like yourself and myself who are neurotypical be able to see the world through a different
neurotypical
lens.
is about as typical as I get.
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to set that there.
Yes, exactly.
So it would drive you crazy as well if you saw the word like I did.
Yes, it would.
It really would.
So how do you deal with it? But now you feel that you're reading, right, Grace? Like you've been able to read.
It's easier for me to read now because
Okay. Do you have to wear like cool sunglasses all the time?
no.
Or? Oh, okay.
So the thing what I do is I have to memorize it.
You got to do a
because
lot
if
of
I don't,
memorization.
because
Okay.
so
what happens when you
Mama.
see a new word?
when I say a new word, well, I can memorize it fast.
Oh, okay.
So my mom, she what was I gonna say? I don't remember.
Oh, about memorizing?
Memorizing fast
So
and reading.
Well, what they'll
and-
also
oh,
do
okay.
too, and so we've been able to go to what's called Parents' Day, and what's fascinating about that is that we can watch how they're using these different learning styles and different
Okay.
learning mechanisms and approaches. And so one thing that they do is they train Grace to see kind of like pieces of words and memorize what that sounds like and piece them together. So there's so many ways to teach a child who does learn differently
Okay.
when you know those workarounds, when you know to use
tricks.
color, when you know to use the colored lenses,
Okay.
all those tricks. And I just don't know that
I know they're
public
not really tricks,
schools-
but it's just
well, they're tricks, they're workarounds, they're ways to
Tools.
manage it. Because as you said, it is scary. Although realize that if we were to wake up dyslexic tomorrow, it would be scary because we're not used to it. For Grace, it's always been this
it's
way.
normal. Okay.
And that's what's interesting is that when you go to a place like Landmark and you see the student body, you realize there are all these young kids, but there's something very kind of deeper about them. And that's because from the time they were 3 or 4, when their mom was saying, write your name out, Johnny, and they tried to do it
Okay.
and they couldn't do it, they knew something wasn't working for them at the age of 3 or 4.
Okay.
But as parents, we don't get the
Because you
confirmation.
can't get inside your child's brain.
Of course, especially when they're a toddler. And so I think that's what's
Although there
really
were many
difficult.
times I would have liked to.
Right. So I think that's what's tough is as parents, especially if it's our first child, we see our child having trouble in school. We don't know exactly what's going on. We don't
And
know
the
what
first
to
thing you
look
think of
for.
is parenting fail.
Oh, of course. Obviously, I'm not doing this right, you know, as a parent. And then when you really understand the difference, what I've been able to see as far as children being in the wrong school placement and then put them in the right school placement, we had a case where this child was very anxious in his environment. He was in second grade. He had a bowl cut, kind of like Cousin Oliver from the Brady Bunch, the bowl cut. And his parents had to shave his head.
A really bad haircut.
They had to shave his head, his hair, so that he would stop pulling out these quarter-sized chunks because of the stress he was having.
Oh, wow.
And we went in and advocated, and we said, this child has so much anxiety, he's pulling out these chunks out of his hair. Obviously, this is not the right placement.
This
How
is
can
not
this child
working.
learn here? And so we found him this smaller school placement. He was one of 10 kids. And I saw a year later, his hair was all grown in. He was blossoming. He was doing fantastic. So I always think of it like if we took a rainforest flower
Okay.
and we planted it in the desert and the flower starts to die,
Right.
we would not blame the flower because we would know that's a rainforest flower that needs to be in the rainforest, not in the desert.
Okay.
Okay. But what's happening is we have these these rainforest flowers in the form of a dyslexic child or an autistic child or a child who learns in some other processing way. And we're saying, well, this child's wrong.
Throw them in the desert and say,
Because they're not thriving when really.
Kind of like that cartoon where it's like all the animals are there and it's like, okay, climb the tree, and the elephant can't climb the tree, so the elephant is a failure.
Exactly, and meanwhile, the elephant was never meant to climb a tree.
Exactly.
Right? But the elephant will be amazing if you put it in the right place for an elephant.
Right.
So with children, it's a matter of really, as a parent, understanding that if we see that they're having trouble learning, as much as we go right to, it's my fault as a parent, take a step back and say, let me talk to my pediatrician, let's get testing done, and then from there, you can get so much education as to what's going on with your child's learning style. And then really think of it in terms of, is my child a rainforest flower? And are they right now in desert soil?
Right.
Then let's figure out the right soil for them.
Stop watering them, actually transplant
Let's get them
yeah.
into the right soil so that they can thrive. And there's actually a book called Fish on a Bicycle, or Fish in a Tree.
Fish in a Tree.
And it's about a dyslexic child's journey. And the whole concept, Einstein said, if a fish is great in the ocean, but if you have them try to ride a bicycle or climb a tree, just like you said with the elephant, it's never going to work.
Right.
That's really
and then
what we're looking
the
at.
The fish is convinced that it failed.
And here's the piece too. For Grace, she's a success story because we were able to get her to Landmark, and now
that's
she's
because
thriving.
You have a law degree.
Yes, and I was able.
But what would happen if you didn't have a law degree?
Exactly. And so what happens is a lot of parents doubt themselves. A lot of parents don't understand the funding issue is causing there to be a lot of gaslighting, and they're getting information that's not accurate. As a parent, trust your instincts. As a parent, trust what your child's telling you. As a parent, you can also have your child tested for an independent educational testing to see if the school is telling you your child's at grade level. Take them to a place like Kumon. Have them do an entry-level screening for short money. And they'll come back and say your child's reading at a kindergarten level. And then you can take that to the school and say, I have this independent testing that is contrary to what you people are telling me. We need to sort this out. But if we just keep blaming ourselves as parents or questioning what we're seeing, we can't really get our child who needs to be in the rainforest out of the desert.
Now, one question that I'm wondering, back when I asked how many years Landmark spanned, would there ever be an option or a consideration for Grace to go back to a public school setting?
Absolutely, there would be. So the idea is that dyslexia is a different way of learning, and dyslexia remediation is what we've been talking about in terms of using the Play-Doh or using different creative ways of memorization, things like that. So that you get it so that dyslexia is no longer this hardship that's interfering with her learning, and now she's able to learn.
She has the tools that...
Exactly.
Would you ever want to leave Landmark, do you think?
Well...
That's a no.
It's hard.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Because you're best friends at public school, right?
Yes. I can make friends very quickly. So when I was at the public school, I made friends super quickly.
Cool.
And so...
Did you make friends super quickly at the other school?
At Landmark? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So if I went to more public schools, I would make friends super, super easily.
Super easily.
And I would be really sad that I had to leave them.
To leave Landmark.
Yes.
And, so what's difficult, too, for kids who do have alternate learning styles, similar to Grace, Grace started at Montessori school. We wanted her to go all the way through, but because of her dyslexia, she went to public school. And then from there, she went to Landmark. So in 3 short years, first grade, second grade, third grade, she had 3 different schools. And one of the things we talk about, and this is a realistic aspect of having a different learning style, is that you're probably not going to stay at the same school all the time. And what we try to talk about is at each new school, it's like you find these new gems and they're your friends, and you gather them, and wherever you go, you can always keep these friendships. And so it's an opportunity to meet different people at different schools. But it is a reality that for Grace, she might need 3 to 5 years at Landmark. And then she's done. She's remediated. And then from there, she could go back to the public school. What's really sad is that remediation is much less costly and much more effective the younger you get these children. If you get them in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, you can still turn it around. By the time you get to them in 7th and 8th grade, they believe they're stupid. And they have major self-worth issues, depression issues, and then you've got puberty going on, and it's a whole cauldron of difficulty.
Right.
And it costs 10 times as much as it would have cost when they're much younger. The only problem is the early intervention delays being able to
plus
find
a lot
it.
of times you're struggling and you're
The
fighting with the
resistance.
school system, and you know that takes time. And if you only have an evaluation once every year, I mean, it doesn't take long to add up to 5 or 6 years.
And 5 or 6 years for a child is 5 or 6
half
years
their
they
lifetime.
can't get back. And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this is that one of our major problems in our society that's very costly and troublesome is prison overcrowding. If you go to any prison, you will find approximately 80% of the inmates are functionally illiterate. What that means is if they get out on the street, they can't read exit, they can't read stuff. And I've known dyslexic individuals who are both doctors and lawyers.
Cool.
So what the crime that I think against our children is that the money isn't being made available with our tax dollars to do the types of intensive remediation that we need done at a young age.
Yeah, and
6,
fix
7,
the problem correctly, not
now,
just with the Band-Aid.
So that 2-3 decades, our prisons aren't filled with the students who didn't get the remediation.
Right.
And so for every child that we get to Landmark, often my husband will say, okay, but what about all the tens of thousands of other students who still are in the public schools who need that kind of help? And if you go and talk to the student body at Landmark, and if you talk to the staff at Landmark, they understand how lucky every student is to be there. Because we know of people who live in France who have to come to the States for 5 weeks in the summertime so that their daughters can get help at Landmark, because in France, there isn't one school like Landmark.
Wow. Now, how did you find Landmark?
Well, I knew
Not
of
that
Landmark.
I don't want to turn this into a commercial for
right.
Landmark, but
So because I do special education advocacy for my clients, I'm very aware of schools like Clark School in Rowley, Landmark in Manchester. There's also Wyndham Woods is a new school that's opening. So you get your finger on the pulse of the schools that are particularly good at, they're very well funded. The teaching staff is very well motivated, and they've got a great track record for very effective remediation. Landmark is probably the gold standard right now, and the work that Bob Bruto, the headmaster, has done, he's been working on this passion project since the 1970s.
Wow.
And what he's built in the Landmark outreach, because Landmark also is working with public school special education departments saying, this is what we do at Landmark. This is what's really helping our students. We understand you don't have the resources, and we understand that your families can't all put your children at
try
Landmark.
this approach and
but
try
this.
incorporating this into the
And
because
what's
it won't,
sad,
it won't necessarily harm the traditional learners, but it will help.
Yes, it will make these special education efforts in the public schools
It will mainstream
that
from
much
both
more
directions.
potent, that much more effective. What's difficult, though, is that some public schools are open to Landmark outreach, and some public schools, their attitude is, we've got this. We don't need you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
And that's heartbreaking to me, because the system is broken. I don't think this idea of pushing in and pulling out children who need special education remediation is ever going to work, because to push a child into a classroom and then pull them out of another classroom is anxiety producing. And as human beings, whether we are alternate learners or neurotypical learners, when we are anxious, we can't think straight.
You can't learn.
Think of a horror movie. When you say, don't go down that road, don't go in that car.
They
But
always
they're
do.
all stressed
They
out.
never listen.
They never listen. Why? Because they're sick with anxiety and they can't think clearly. How can a child who's feeling anxious from being pushed into this class and pulled in for this service and pushed into that class and pulled out again 6 to 8 times during an
Feel like a
8-hour
tennis
school
ball.
day? Exactly. That's very stressful, especially for a student who knows that they're learning differently. So at Landmark, you don't have the push in and pull out. You have the cohesive learning.
Okay.
And Clark School is also a school that for students who are eccentric, autistic, somewhere on that spectrum, very intelligent, what they do is if a child's feeling restless, they will, because they work with behavioral issues, what they'll do is they'll say, let's go take a walk around the school. Let's go do some jumping jacks, right? They have a level of flexibility. One of their electives is trailblazing. Let's go out into the woods and literally blaze a trail.
Wow.
Another elective is coding.
And then check for ticks when we get
But the other one is coding. Like these kids, these autistic students are so bright. Let's teach them to code, right?
Yeah.
Because that plays to their skill set. Whereas in the public school, you don't have that level of, we know how this student learns. They learn differently. And instead of ignoring the way that they learn differently, we're going to play to that strength, right? So if they think in terms of technical ways or pictures, we're going to get them coding because that plays to their strengths. Versus having them talk about emotional intelligence, where an autistic child has a blind spot around emotional intelligence, right? So it's a matter of not going at it harder, but going at it smarter. When a child's learning differently, you don't say, get it together, figure it out, what's wrong with you? You say, let me understand this alternate way that they learn, and then let's play to the strengths. It's not a disorder, it's a different way of learning. And what makes me really disheartened is when I see in social media posts about autism disorder or dyslexia disorder. It's not a disorder. Again, back to the CAT scans. You look at the CAT scan, there are different areas of the brain being used.
Now, total random, I haven't gone on any tangents yet, but as you were talking about language development and reading and, you know, the brain working, what about sign language?
Sign language is interesting, and sign language is more really with the hard of hearing. So you've got Perkins School for the blind, and then there's Beverly School for the deaf.
But I'm just thinking, you know, when my children were born, I was introduced to baby sign language because children can learn sign language before they can develop the language skills, so it eliminates the frustration. And a lot of people were criticizing me as a parent, saying, well, why are you teaching your child sign language?
Oh, that's interesting.
Because she won't know how to talk. Well, as soon as she started talking, she was at 5-word sentences right away.
Because she had the vocabulary.
Because she had the vocabulary and she knew the sentence structure and everything.
Well, I often say that from my perception, again, I don't have dyslexia, I often say that it's word blindness or phoneme blindness, almost like someone's colorblind. So they're not vision blind. Grace can see, but when she sees it differently, like someone who's colorblind, right? She's seeing it and it's moving, whereas someone who's colorblind is just not going to see color. They're going to see grays, black and white. So I think a lot of times, I think that's why they do use the tactile learning and they use the color differentiation, because dyslexic individuals are very creative and using the different tactile sensory mechanisms and manipulatives, and then also using this different modalities as far as let's do this verbally from a stage versus writing it down on a piece of paper. So there's just different ways of going at it. So I think you're right in that to teach a blind student how to read, you're going to use it through sensory Braille. What are they doing at Landmark? They're teaching students who have difficulty with orthographic configurations, which are letters and numbers, and they're using Play-Doh because of the tactile. And then they've got the colorful Play-Doh. They're tying that in to the learning. And it locks it in much more effectively than the typical kind of teaching style.
Wow.
I know.
I know.
And so really it's the difference between a child thriving
Okay.
and a child really floundering in their educational career. And we know that education is the kind of the jumping off point for a successful career as an adult, in being able to make options. Where do you want to go to college?
Okay.
But if a student never gets their dyslexia remediation, they can be a genius, but because they're struggling with
Just trapped.
language, they're trapped. Exactly. It's almost like steam in a kettle, and it's all blocked in there. And when you actually find the right placement for them, it's like you've allowed that steam to release, and it's so potent and powerful. They could, I don't know if you're familiar with Temple Grandin. She's an autistic individual. And there's a movie called Temple Grandin. It's on HBO.
Okay.
Claire Danes plays Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin is an autistic individual. She saw in pictures, and she saw in terms of mechanics.
Okay.
She, because of her autistic mind, changed the way that we care for, feed, and slaughter cattle in half of the operations in this country.
Wow.
In a way that's much more humane and reduces the cortisone level in our meat, which makes our meat much more healthy for us. So Temple Grandin says we've got to value the autistic mind, because if we didn't have the autistic individual, we'd all be standing around a campfire as cavemen, and no one would have developed the wheel, because we'd all be social standing around a campfire, and no one would be sitting there saying, how can I make this roll better?
Yeah.
And that's what the autistic mind is doing. So it almost looks like they're not engaged in a conversation. And in some ways they are, but they're also looking at, that doesn't work, and is there a way that I can make that better? So
or
they're
not is
visual
there a way, but
thinkers.
how can I?
How can I make it better? How can I rewire that? And so it seems like they're distracted, or it seems like they're interpersonally not connecting. It's just that they're thinking
But their mind's just going too
differently.
fast.
And when you watch this movie, you understand that once they got Temple Grandin in the right educational placement with a teacher who understood her, he unlocked the genius that enabled her to develop that patent. She also has something called a squeeze machine that helped her. So with autistic individuals, being held helps them feel better, but the physical contact is too intense for them. So she developed a machine that gives that sensation, almost like a weighted vest or a weighted blanket, and she patented that.
Cool.
Her autistic mind is what enabled her
Problem solver.
to solve that problem.
Well, that's pretty cool. But you know what?
We're out of time.
We're out of time.
See that?
So thank you, Grace. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed our conversation. This is pretty cool. Now I want to go home and play with Play-Doh.
Yes.
That would be so much fun. So I hope you have a successful year now that you're going back to the same school, so you'll be able to see all your friends again.
Yes.
And thank you, Melissa, for enlightening me about all the educational options.
Well, thank you for having us, because this is a very important topic. It's very passionate, a subject that's passionate for me, but also being able to see Grace going and struggling at one school placement, and then within a week,
Wow.
it was like fairy dust was sprinkled over
Cool.
her.
Fairy dust.
So the right school placement makes all the difference.
Right. Well, I would like to thank everyone for tuning in, and hopefully you found this conversation as enlightening and as encouraging as I have. So have a great night, and I will see you around town.